"You're sleeping with all of us," three giant women told the Virgin Mountain Man who bought a house. He thought he'd finally found peace buying a quiet home on the edge of town, ready to live out his days in solitude. But the moment he stepped inside, the lamplight revealed three towering widows staring him down, and their words froze him in his boots. "You're sleeping with all of us." What begins as one man's dream of a new start turns into a storm of scandal, danger, and whispers across the frontier. The widows claim the home is theirs, but the railroad has its own plans steeped in fraud, greed, and blood. A sick child's life hangs in the balance. A preacher holds secrets in his Bible. And one honest man must decide whether to fight for justice or vanish back into the mountains. The town is watching. The railroad is circling. And the house itself could tear a family or a future apart. Will he find the courage to stand with them when the law, the railroad, and even his own fears come crashing down? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The dying embers cast long shadows across the weathered floorboards as Noah Kramer sat at the kitchen table, his large hands wrapped around a tin cup of cooling coffee. Across from him, the three Caldwell sisters watched him with varying degrees of weariness and exhaustion etched on their faces. The lamplight flickered, making their shadows dance against the walls of what he'd thought would be his empty house. The eldest stood with her arms crossed, her tall frame nearly matching Noah's height. Her stern expression hadn't softened since their first encounter moments ago. Ruth, the middle sister, kept her hands folded in her lap, occasionally stealing glances at Noah through honey-colored lashes. Karen, the youngest, slumped in her chair, dark circles under her eyes speaking of countless nights tending to her sickly child. "The rail company gave us nothing," Rochelle explained, her voice tight with barely contained anger. Three good men, gone in an instant when that bridge gave way. Not even enough left for proper burials. She turned to stare out the window into the darkness, her jaw clenched. Ruth's gentle voice filled the heavy silence. "We had nowhere else to go. The company housing." She paused, swallowing hard. "They gave us 2 days to clear out. 2 days. To pack up our lives and leave the only homes we'd known." Noah's coffee had grown cold, but he hardly noticed. His chest ached with their story, recognizing the familiar weight of loss in their words. He'd known that sort of emptiness himself, after losing his own parents. Karen let out a bitter laugh. "Imagine our surprise when we found this place. Empty for years," they said in town. "Strong walls, solid roof." She gestured around the kitchen. "Better than sleeping under the stars with winter coming." "I reckon that's true enough," Noah said, quietly, his deep voice barely above a whisper. The trapper's savings in his pocket seemed to weigh heavier now. Knowing it had bought him more than just a house, it had bought him an impossible situation. Rochelle turned back from the window, her eyes sharp. "So now you understand, we can't leave." "Won't leave." Her hand rested on the back of Ruth's chair, protective and firm. "You've got your deed, but we've got nowhere else." Noah rubbed his beard, thinking of the simple life he'd imagined for himself here. A quiet place to belong, maybe start a garden come spring. Instead, he found himself sharing space with three formidable women who had as much claim to shelter. As he did to his deed, Sheriff Lathrop's a fair man, he offered carefully. "Come morning, we can ride into town, talk to him proper, sort this out, legal-like." He looked at each sister in turn, trying to convey his honest intentions. Ruth nodded slowly, relief softening her features. "That seems reasonable. Sheriff knows our situation. He's been kind to us before." "Till then," Karen said, stifling a yawn, "you'll take the loft. It's clean enough. We've kept the whole house tidy, truth be told." Noah felt his ears grow warm at the thought of sleeping under the same roof as three unmarried women. It wasn't proper, wasn't at all what he'd planned. But the alternative was putting them out in the cold night, and that wasn't something his conscience would allow. "I'll take the loft," he agreed, standing slowly so as not to appear threatening. His head nearly brushed the ceiling beams. "You ladies keep to your rooms. We'll all rest peaceful tonight and face tomorrow when it comes." Rochelle's stance relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained vigilant. That settled then, for tonight at least. She moved toward the hallway where the bedrooms lay. "Come morning, we'll see what the law has to say about it all." Noah gathered his bedroll and climbed the ladder to the loft. listening to the soft sounds of the sisters preparing for sleep below. The wooden floors creaked as they moved about, and he heard quiet murmurs of prayer from one of the rooms. Ruth's voice, he guessed, asking for guidance, lying in the darkness, his blanket spread over the rough boards. Noah stared at the rafters. Above, the house settled around him with unfamiliar sounds, the gentle breathing of others, the whisper of wind through cracks he'd need to seal, the distant howl of a coyote. It wasn't the solitary peace he'd dreamed of, but something stirred in his heart, a strange mixture of duty and possibility. Sleep came slowly as he listened to the quiet house breathe, knowing that morning would bring hard choices for them. His last conscious thought was of Ruth's gentle eyes, and the way she'd looked at him with something other than suspicion. Maybe, just maybe, there was more than one way to find belonging. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Flat's dusty Main Street as Noah Kramer walked beside the three Caldwell sisters toward the sheriff's office. His weathered hat hung respectfully in his hands, and his boots matched the sisters' steady pace. The town was just stirring to life, with shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Sheriff Tom Lathrop looked up from his desk as they filed in, his weathered face creasing with concern at the unusual group. The office smelled of coffee and gun oil, and wanted posters rustled on the wall in the morning breeze. "Well now," the sheriff said, pushing back his chair, "what brings all of you here so early?" Noah laid his deed on the desk while Rochelle stepped forward, her stance proud despite the circumstances. "Sheriff, there seems to be a matter of confused ownership." Lathrop picked up the deed, studying it with narrowed eyes. His frown deepened as he read, and he scratched his graying beard. "This here's troublesome, far as I recall. That property might still be under claim." He looked at the sisters. "You ladies filed something, didn't you?" "We did," Ruth confirmed softly. "Months ago, when we first took shelter there." The sheriff stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Best see the county clerk about this. Follow me." They trooped across the street to the courthouse, where the clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, pulled out a massive ledger at the sheriff's request. He thumbed through the pages, muttering to himself. "Ah, here's the trouble," he said, pointing to a smudged entry. "Caldwell notice of temporary occupancy, but it's been misindexed. Should have been flagged before any auction." He peered at them over his spectacles. "This'll need a proper hearing. Judge Burdick can see you in 3 days' time." The walk home was quiet, all 5 of them moving in step along the rutted road. Noah noticed how Ruth kept a protective hand on Karen's arm, how Rochelle's eyes scanned the horizon as if searching for answers in the distant mountains. Back at the house, Karen's young son Micah greeted them with a bout of heavy coughing that shook his small frame. The boy's face was flushed, his ragdoll clutched tight to his chest. "That cough's getting worse," Ruth said, pressing a cool hand to his forehead. "We should try a mustard plaster." "I'll fetch fresh water," Noah offered, already reaching for the bucket. The pump creaked with each stroke, and he found comfort in the simple task. Throughout the afternoon, he split wood, the rhythmic thunk of his axe echoing across the yard. The growing woodpile gave him something solid to focus on while inside. The sisters worked out their new arrangement when he entered the kitchen for the evening meal. He found a list of chores tacked to the pantry door in Ruth's neat hand. The rules were clear. Noah would keep to the loft, the sisters to their rooms. All doors would be latched at night. They would share the common spaces with proper dignity. Karen served up a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The plates passed around, their worn table in awkward silence. Micah's coughing punctuated their meal, each spell making his mother's face tighten with worry. After the dishes were cleared, Ruth called them to prayer. Noah knelt with the others, his large frame awkward on the floor, as Ruth's gentle voice filled the room. "Lord, grant us fairness in this matter," she prayed, "and please watch over little Micah's health." The last light faded from the windows as Rochelle stood and walked to the mantel. With deliberate movements, she posted the hearing notice where they all could see it. The paper seemed to glow in the lamplight, a reminder of the uncertainty hanging over them all. "We'll need to wire Denver first thing," Rochelle announced, her voice practical. "Those medical receipts from when Micah was in hospital will prove we weren't here during the auction." Noah watched the stars appear through the window, thinking of how differently this day had gone from what he'd expected. The house creaked, around them already seeming to hold more stories than he'd imagined when he'd first turned that key in the lock. Micah coughed again from his mother's arms, and Noah saw Ruth already moving to prepare the mustard plaster. Despite the tension of their situation, there was something about the way they worked together, each knowing their place in this temporary arrangement. That spoke of the possibility of peace. The morning brought a rhythm of work to the old house. Noah examined the sagging porch boards, testing each one with his boot heel, while Rochfell stood nearby, arms crossed, watching his every move. The wood groaned under his weight, revealing several spots that needed immediate attention. "These 3 boards here," he said, pointing with his toe. "They're rotted clean through." Rochelle nodded, her stern expression softening slightly as she pulled a measuring string from her apron pocket. "I'll measure while you fetch the saw." Inside, Ruth had already hung fresh sheets at the windows as makeshift curtains. Her gentle humming of Amazing Grace drifted through the open door while she worked her needle through worn fabric, mending proper curtains for later. The familiar hymn seemed to ease the tension in the air. From the kitchen came the rhythmic sound of Karen's wooden spoon against the pot as she stirred a thick stew. Little Micah sat at the table, his rag doll propped before him, coughing into his sleeve. "Here now, sweet boy," Karen murmured, bringing him a spoonful of honey mixed with onion syrup. "This'll help ease that throat." Noah and Rochelle worked steadily. On the porch, sawdust collecting around their boots, she called measurements. He sawed boards, and together they fitted new planks into place. The sound of hammering drew attention from passers-by on the street. Some neighbors tipped their hats in greeting, while others stopped to stare, their disapproving glances sharp as thorns. The afternoon sun was high when Preacher Elias Whitley's wagon rattled to a stop before the house. The older man climbed down carefully, a heavy sack of flour balanced against his hip. "Thought you folks might need this," he said, carrying the flour up the newly repaired steps. His kind eyes took in the scene, Noah and Rochelle with their tools, Ruth sewing by the window, Karen tending to Micah. Ruth hurried to take the flour, while the preacher settled himself on the porch rail. "A household divided cannot stand," he said thoughtfully, "but I see you're all trying to make this work proper." He pulled out his handkerchief to wipe his brow. "Keep your tempers bridled, friends. Truth wears long legs." Before leaving, he extended an invitation to Sunday service, his gaze including them all. "The Lord's house welcomes every soul seeking shelter." He reminded them as evening approached. Sheriff Lathrop's boots sounded on the new porch boards. He entered the house, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Judge Burdick's particular about paper-proof," he explained. "You'll need those Denver telegrams, and any receipts you ladies might have kept." Ruth disappeared into her room, returning with a battered tobacco tin. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing a stack of carefully preserved hospital receipts from Micah's illness. Among them was a folded letter, the paper thin from repeated handling. "This was from my Levi," she said softly, smoothing the creases. His last letter home. Her voice caught as she read aloud. "I'll move us to a safer line after payday." Noah's head came up sharply at those words, something clicking in his mind, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Instead, he watched Ruth tuck the letter away, noting how her hands lingered on the tin before closing it. The sun was setting when Karen ladled out bowls of stew for supper. They ate in measured silence, each respecting the invisible lines they'd drawn. Micah's occasional coughing was the only sound beyond spoons against bowls as the clock struck 9. Noah rose from his chair. Before climbing to the loft, he filled a bucket with fresh water and set it by the hearth. "In case the boy's cough gets worse in the night," he explained quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Rochelle nodded once, acknowledging the thoughtful gesture. The sisters moved about their evening routine, checking locks and banking the fire. Noah heard their doors closing one by one as he settled into his loft space through the darkness. Ruth's voice carried up to him, laying out tomorrow's plans. "We'll need to send those telegrams to Denver first thing," she said, "then fetch groceries. Best keep clear of gossips at the general store." "Agreed," came Rochelle's firm reply. "The less talk, the better." The house creaked and settled around them, each person in their assigned space, the new boundaries holding firm despite the strangeness of their situation. Outside, A whippoorwill called into the gathering night, its lonely song echoing across the quiet town. Morning brought a crisp wind that shook the cottonwood leaves, their silver backs flashing like coins in the early light. Noah hitched the old bay mare to the wagon while Rochel stood watch from the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "Mind that, Trace," she called out, descending the steps. Mare favors her left side. Inside, Ruth moved about the kitchen, measuring willow bark into a pot of water for Micah's fever. Karen sat beside her son's bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. The boy's cough echoed through the quiet house. "We'll be back before midday," Rochel assured her sisters, climbing onto the wagon seat beside Noah. He clicked his tongue at the mare, and they set off toward town, the wheels creaking against the packed dirt road. The telegraph office occupied one corner of the train depot, its windows still dark in the early morning shadows. They waited on the platform benches until the operator arrived, keys jingling as he unlocked the door. Rochel stepped forward, her back straight as a fence post. "I need to send a wire to Dr. Phillips in Denver," she said, pulling a carefully written note from her pocket, requesting dates of treatment for my sister Karen Caldwell and her son Micah. The operator's fingers moved swift and sure across the key, the machine clicking out its metallic message. "Lines running clear today," he said, looking up. "Might have your answer by evening." Noah guided their wagon next to Granger's Mercantile, where morning sun warmed the weathered boards. Inside, he filled his basket with necessities: flour, salt, pork, lamp oil, while Rochel examined seed packets for the kitchen garden. The clerk's eyes followed them as Noah counted out coins from his own purse, running quite the harem house. "Up there, ain't you?" the man drawled, loud enough for other customers to hear. Noah's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "You'll mind your tongue about those ladies," he said quietly, gathering their purchases. The clerk's face reddened, but he said nothing more. The mare dawdled on the return journey, stopping to investigate every patch of grass. As they approached the house, Noah spotted something odd near their property line: wooden stakes driven into the ground at regular intervals. "Survey markers," Rochel explained, frowning. "Railroads always measuring something." Noah climbed down and collected 2 stakes that had worked loose. "Best take these in," he said. "Don't want any children tripping in the dark." The day passed slowly. Ruth served a simple supper of beans and cornbread, while Karen coaxed Micah to swallow more willowbark tea. They gathered around the table, the lantern's glow casting long shadows on the walls as they waited for news from Denver, just as Ruth began clearing the dishes. A sharp knock echoed through the house. Noah opened the door to find Eli Bixby, the courier boy, holding out a yellow telegram envelope. "Special delivery from Denver," Eli announced importantly, accepting the penny Noah offered before scampering off into the gathering dusk. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she opened the message. "Dr. Phillips confirms it," she said, relief clear in her voice. Karen and Micah were under his care the whole week of the auction. He's listed every date. She fetched her writing box and began copying the dates in her neat hand onto fresh paper. "Judge Burdick will need this properly written," she explained, carefully forming each number and letter. Rochel disappeared into her room and returned with their Sunday clothes, 3 dark dresses for the sisters and Noah's best shirt. "Freshly pressed. We'll need to make a proper showing at church tomorrow," she said, laying them out carefully. "Though we'd best sit apart, quiet-like, to avoid loose tongues. 3 pews distance at least." Ruth agreed softly, looking up from her writing. No need to feed the gossip mill. Night settled over the house like a heavy blanket. Noah paused at the bottom of the loft ladder, listening to Micah's breathing. The boy's cough seemed easier now, less harsh in the darkness. Satisfied, he climbed to his space under the rafters, the solid proof of the telegram giving them all a measure of peace as they waited for morning and the test of Sunday service. Ahead, Sunday morning dawned cool and clear, the early light touching the frost-rimmed grass with silver. The Caldwell sisters emerged from the house in their dark Sunday dresses, hymn books clutched close. Noah followed several paces behind, his boots cleaned of mud and his best shirt pressed smooth beneath his coat. They walked the dusty road toward the white-painted church, maintaining a careful distance that spoke of propriety. The small bell in the steeple rang out across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. Noah watched Ruth straight back ahead of him, noting how she steadied Karen when Mika's coughing made them pause. Inside the church, conversation died to whispers as they entered. The sisters slipped into a pew near the middle, while Noah took a seat 3 rows back, his hat resting on his knee. Preacher Whitley stood at the simple pulpit, his Bible already open to the book of Ruth. Today, we consider Ruth, chapter 2, the preacher began, his voice carrying to every corner, and how Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her." His eyes swept the congregation as he spoke of kindness to strangers, of mercy shown to those in need. After the final hymn, the congregation spilled into the churchyard. Mrs. Snodgrass, her gray hair neat beneath her bonnet, approached Karen with genuine concern. "That boy needs strengthening," she said, patting Mika's thin shoulder. "I've got chicken broth cooling at home. I'll bring some by this afternoon." But not everyone showed such Christian charity. The railroad foreman, Jenkins, stood with several workers near the hitching post, his voice carrying deliberately. "Ain't right, widows squatting on rail property. Some folks need to learn their place." Noah felt the weight of his Colt sink against his hip but kept his hands loose at his sides. Violence would solve nothing here. He caught Rochelle's eye and gave a slight nod. Words would have to be their weapons now. Back at the house, Noah found tools and set to work on a loose shutter that had been banging in the wind. The rhythmic sound of his hammering accompanied Ruth's movements in the kitchen as she warmed Mrs. Snodgrass's broth for Micah. The afternoon passed peacefully, sun moving across the sky while chickadees called from the cottonwoods. As dusk approached, they gathered in the front room. Ruth opened her Bible, and they took turns reading verses about peace and neighborliness. The words seemed to settle something in all of them, like dust after rain. Night brought the yipping of coyotes from the creek bottom. Noah took up the lantern and made his rounds, checking each window, testing latches, ensuring all was secure. The yellow light swept across the yard, pushing back the darkness. When he returned inside, Rochelle was waiting at the kitchen table, her face thoughtful in the lamplight. "We need to show we're not afraid," she said firmly. "I propose we host a community supper tomorrow evening. Let folks see we're decent people, not squatters or worse." Noah nodded slowly. "I'll ride to town at first light, fetch extra beans and coffee. Some cornmeal, too, if the store has it fresh ground." Karen managed a faint smile as she tucked Micah into bed, making sure his beloved ragdoll was secure in his arms. The boy's breathing seemed easier tonight, his cheeks less flushed with fever. In the kitchen, Ruth worked by lamplight, setting fresh-baked loaves on the wooden cooling board. The warm, yeasty smell filled the house, bringing comfort with it. She looked up as Noah prepared to climb to his loft. "Peace is work," she whispered, her eyes meeting his, like kneading bread or mending fences. "Takes time and patience." Noah nodded, understanding in his heart what she meant. He climbed the ladder to his loft, rolled out his blanket, and settled down to sleep. Below, he could hear the quiet movements of the sisters banking the fire for the night. His mind eased toward rest, filled with thoughts of tomorrow's supper, and the chance to build bridges with their neighbors, one meal at a time. Morning brought a flurry of activity to the shared household. The kitchen crackled with energy as kettles boiled on the wood stove, steam rising in lazy curls. Noah hauled wooden benches from the barn, scrubbing each one clean with lye soap and a stiff brush. His muscles flexed as he positioned planks across sturdy sawhorses beneath the spreading cottonwoods. Creating makeshift tables for the evening's gathering, Ruth moved with quiet purpose, stringing a rope between trees to hold lanterns for when darkness fell. Her fingers worked quickly, testing each knot. In the kitchen, Rochelle's whetstone sang against steel as she sharpened knives for carving. The metallic rhythm matched the steady determination in her eyes. Karen stirred great iron pots of beans and stew, adding pinches of precious dried herbs. When Mika's cough echoed from the bedroom, she paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rest. A spelled child," she murmured, helping him settle in the wooden rocker near the kitchen window. The boy clutched his ragdoll, watching the preparations through fever-bright eyes. As afternoon sun slanted golden through the cottonwoods, neighbors began arriving. Women in clean aprons carried covered dishes and fresh-baked pies. Men brought instruments, a fiddle here, a mouth harp there. Soon the yard filled with the mingled sounds of laughter and tuning strings. Lantern light caught the silver threads in Ruth's hair. Children darted between adults' legs, snatching cookies when they thought no one was looking. The atmosphere grew warm with good food and better company. Noah stood near the punch bowl, his tall frame easy to spot in the crowd. He raised his tin, cup high, to roofmates, he called out, his voice carrying across the yard and to good neighbors. Karen's cheeks pinked at his words, and even stern Rochelle's lips curved in a reluctant smile. The sweet notes of a fiddle waltz floated on the evening air. Peace seemed to settle over the gathering like a comfortable blanket until a man in an expensive Eastern-cut coat strode through the gate. Conversation stuttered to silence as Silas Pike, the railroad's land agent, approached the tables with purposeful steps. Pike's well-manicured hand slapped a sheaf of papers onto the nearest plank. "Evening, folks," he announced, his cultured voice carrying a sharp edge. "Pardon the interruption, but business cannot wait." He smoothed the documents with practiced fingers. "These papers show the Caldwell men forfeited both occupancy rights and final wages before their unfortunate passing." Sheriff Lathrop stepped forward, taking the papers with a frown. He studied the official-looking stamp, holding it close to a lantern. The ink glistened wetly in the light, raising questions in the lawman's eyes. "The railroad plans to expand the line through this property within the month," Pike continued, satisfaction gleaming in his gaze. "Progress waits for no one." Micah close, shielding him from Pike's cold stare. The boy buried his face in her skirts, coughing. Noah moved with deliberate calm, positioning himself between Pike and the sisters. His voice came low but firm. "We'll answer by law, Mr. Pike, through proper channels." Sheriff Lathrop cleared his throat. "Given the urgent nature of the railroad's claim, I'll set a formal hearing for tomorrow afternoon." He glanced apologetically at the sisters. 2:00 sharp at the courthouse. The festive mood shattered like dropped china. Neighbors mumbled awkward goodbyes, gathering children and dishes. Soon, only empty benches remained under the cottonwoods. Food barely touched on abandoned plates. Noah worked methodically in the growing darkness, coiling the lantern rope while the sisters cleaned up inside. Through the windows, he could see them moving back and forth, washing dishes in silence. The clink of china and soft splash of water carried their worry more clearly than words. When the yard was set to rights, Noah joined them in the kitchen. They gathered around the table, lamp burning low, to plan their testimony for tomorrow's hearing. Each sister spoke of their husband's final days, searching memories for details that might counter Pike's claims. Ruth's Bible lay open beside her, its pages marking verses about truth and justice. One by one, the lamps went out as exhaustion claimed them. The last light extinguished, leaving only starlight filtering through the windows and the weight of tomorrow's battle pressing heavy on their hearts. Near midnight, Micah's coughing grew harsh and desperate. Karen rushed to his bedside, pressing her hand to his forehead. The boy's skin burned like a hot stove beneath her touch, her usual calm, cracked fear spilling through. "Ruth, he's burning up." Karen's voice shook as she called out. Ruth hurried in, her face tightening at the sight of Micah's flushed cheeks. She touched his forehead and immediately went into action. "We need vinegar and cool water, now." Noah, who had been dozing in the loft, heard the commotion and climbed. Down without being asked, he began stoking the stove and putting kettles onto heat. His large hands worked quickly, shaving thin curls of yellow soap into a basin for clean washing cloths. Rachel grabbed her shawl, wrapping it tight around her shoulders. "I'm fetching Dr. Cole." The door banged shut behind her as she ran into the night. Ruth mixed vinegar with cool water, while Karen held Micah, who shivered despite his burning skin. Noah brought them fresh cloths and more water, then stepped back, his hat twisted in his hands. In the quiet moments between Micah's coughs, Noah's lips moved in silent prayer, simple words from a heart unused to asking favors. The clock struck 1 in the morning when Dr. Ephraim Cole's buggy rattled up to the house. The doctor strode, in medical bag in hand, his gray hair disheveled from sleep. He shooed everyone but Karen from the room while he examined Micah. Noah paced the kitchen floor, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden planks. Ruth sat at the table, fingers laced. Together in prayer, Rochelle stood rigid by the window, watching the night. After what seemed like hours, Dr. Cole emerged. The fever's high, but not dangerous yet. Keep him quiet and still until it breaks. He pulled a small envelope from his bag. Willow bark. Tea, as strong as he'll take it. Cool compresses on his head and neck. Let him sleep as much as he can. A clatter outside drew Noah to the window. In the weak moonlight, he saw Pike's deputy nailing a crude notice to the gatepost. The paper fluttered in the night wind like a wounded bird. Before anyone could react, hoofbeats approached. Sheriff Lathrop rode up, his face grim in the lantern. Light, he dismounted, strode to the gate, and ripped down Pike's eviction notice. From his saddlebag, he produced an official document, a stay of eviction until the hearing. The sharp rap of his hammer-driving nails seemed to echo off the stars. Dr. Cole opened his black bag again and removed a small brown bottle. "Laudanum?" he said gravely to Karen. "Only if the cough turns to real pain. 3 drops, no more. Mix it with water or tea." He demonstrated the dose with careful movements of his steady hands. Inside Micah's room, the boy's breathing had grown easier. His skin felt cooler to Karen's touch, and his sleep seemed more natural. The first pale light of dawn began to creep through the window as Dr. Cole prepared to leave Dot. Noah walked with him to the gate. "Much obliged, Doc," he said quietly, pressing payment into the physician's hand. "For coming out so late and all, take care of that boy," Cole replied, climbing into his buggy. "And good luck at the hearing." The wheels creaked as he turned toward town. When Noah returned to the house, he found Karen slumped in a chair beside Micah's bed, finally claimed by exhaustion. Moving quietly, he took a clean quilt from the chest and draped it gently over her shoulders. Her face, even in sleep, showed the strain of the long night. Noah settled himself in a kitchen chair near the cold stove. His body ached from tension and lack of sleep, but he kept watch as the night slowly gave way to morning. Through the windows, he could see the first tentative streaks of pink touching the eastern sky. As sunlight crept into the kitchen, the household began to stir. They moved with deliberate slowness, careful not to wake Micah. Ruth pressed wrinkles from her best dress. Rochelle pinned her hair severely back. Karen changed her clothes but kept glancing toward Micah's room, reluctant to leave. Him that their faces showed the long night's vigil eyes, red-rimmed, shoulders heavy with fatigue. Yet they dressed for court with careful dignity, each one knowing what waited for them in town. The battle for their home would begin in just a few hours, whether they were ready or not. Judge Burdick's office felt smaller than usual with 8 people crowded inside. The late morning sun streamed through dusty windows, catching motes that danced in the air as papers shuffled across the judge's desk. Noah stood against the back wall, his hat held respectfully in his large hands, while the 3 Caldwell sisters sat rigid in straight-backed chairs before the judge's desk. Silas Pike lounged near the window, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward with a flourish, waving the forfeiture papers like a victory flag. "Your Honor, these documents clearly show the Caldwell men surrendered all claims to railroad property and wages before their unfortunate deaths," Harrison declared. Placing the papers on the judge's desk with a sharp snap, Ruth rose slowly, her hand steady as she presented the telegram from Denver. "If it please the court, this wire confirms my sister Karen and her son were receiving medical care in Denver during the auction. We could not have known about any sale of our home." Judge Burdick adjusted his spectacles, examining both documents with careful attention. His weathered fingers traced the dates on each paper, his brow furrowing deeper with each moment. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the tense silence. Finally, the judge set both papers down and cleared his throat. "This matter requires additional documentation before I can make a final ruling. I want to see the railroad's wage records and any paperwork from the deceased men's final paydays." He fixed Pike with a stern look. "The railroad will provide these records within 3 days." Pike's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." The judge dismissed them, and they filed out into the bright noon sunshine. Noah and the sisters walked home in weary silence, their boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Back at the house, Ruth warmed a pot of broth, while Karen checked on Micah, who still slept peacefully. They gathered around the kitchen table, too tired to do more than dip chunks of bread in the warm broth. Ruth paused mid-bite, her eyes growing distant. Levi's last words, she murmured. There was something odd about them. She pushed back from the table and hurried to her room, returning with a worn envelope. He mentioned payday, just like in this letter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she carefully examined the envelope. There, hidden in the flap, was a small folded paper she had never noticed before. Ruth smoothed it out on the table, reading. Aloud the faded pencil marks. If I don't make it, ledger proof in the stove belly at Old Section House number 3. Noah leaned forward, careful not to crowd Ruth as she held the note. Section House number 3. That's the abandoned one upriver, ain't it? Rochelle nodded. 5 miles up, where the track curves past Buzzard Rock. We should fetch Preacher Whitley, see if he knows anything about this. Karen wrapped her shawl tighter. I'll stay with Micah. His fever's down, but he needs watching. They sent word to the preacher, who arrived within the hour. His eyes grew serious as he read the note. Yes, I know the place. Used to hold services. There before they moved, the section crews downstream. It's about half a day's wagon ride in good weather. Rochelle stood, decision made. Noah and I will go at first light tomorrow. Ruth can keep house, and Karen will tend to Micah. She looked at Noah. That suit you? He nodded, already mentally preparing for the journey. I'll check the wagon and harness tonight. Make sure everything's sound. They spent the remaining daylight hours in preparation. Noah cleaned and oiled his Colt revolver for wolves, he explained quietly. Though everyone understood the true concern wasn't four-legged predators, Rochelle packed bread, cheese, and dried beef, while Ruth filled canteens with fresh water. No bloodshed, Rochelle said firmly, as she watched Noah check his ammunition. We get in, find the ledger, and get out. That's all. Yes, ma'am, Noah agreed, his voice soft but determined. God willing, won't need anything but daylight and quick hands. As dusk settled over the house, they placed their boots by the door and trimmed the lanterns low. Karen gave Micah his evening dose of willow bark tea, relief evident in her face as his breathing remained steady and clear. Ruth led them in a quiet prayer before they retired for safety, wisdom, and the Lord's protection on the journey ahead. Noah climbed to his loft, listening to the gentle sounds of the sisters settling into their rooms below. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night, its lonely song echoing across the darkening land. They all knew tomorrow's ride could change everything, for better or worse. But for now, they rested, their plan set, waiting for dawn to paint the eastern sky. Frost glittered on the grass like scattered diamonds when Noah and Rochelle stepped out into the pale dawn light. Their breath formed small clouds in the crisp morning air as they hitched the mare to the buckboard wagon. The horse nickered softly, shifting from foot to foot as Noah checked the harness straps one final time, all set. Rochelle asked, adjusting her shawl against the morning chill. Noah nodded, offering his hand to help her up onto the wooden seat. Yes, ma'am, long ride ahead. They rattled out of the yard, the wagon wheels crunching over frozen ruts in the track. Behind them, Ruth stood in the doorway, watching until they disappeared around the bend. Inside, Karen's soft voice could be heard telling Micah stories to keep him still and resting. The morning sun climbed higher as they followed the river upstream. Noah handled the reins with careful attention, guiding the mare around the worst of the rutted track. Neither he nor Rochelle spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts about what they might find. Near mid-morning, they reached a shallow ford. Noah tested the depth with a long stick before easing the wagon into the water. They were halfway across when a sharp crack split the air. Wheel pins broke, Noah announced, jumping down into the cold water to examine the damage. He pulled a length of wire from his coat pocket, working quickly to secure the wheel before it could work loose. Ain't pretty, but it'll hold if we're gentle. Rochelle bowed her head briefly. Lord willing, she murmured, then louder. Let's press on. The sun stood directly overhead when they finally spotted Old Section House number 3. The building slouched against the sky, its roof sagging in the middle like a worn-out saddle. Broken windows gaped like empty eyes, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. Noah helped Rochelle down from the wagon, then drew his revolver to check for unwelcome visitors or wild animals. Finding nothing but dust and fallen leaves, he holstered the weapon, and they entered together. The iron stove dominated the room, cold and silent as a grave marker. Noah knelt beside it, examining the belly panel. "Here we go," he muttered, working his knife around the edges. The metal groaned, then gave way. Rochelle held her breath as Noah reached inside. His hand emerged, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. They carefully unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat columns of figures and signatures. "Look," Rocha pointed to entries near the end. "Here's Levi's signature, and James and Matthew." Her finger traced. The dates, just days before the wreck. Noah squinted at the pages. Safety complaints, too. All signed proper. They had just begun copying the crucial pages when the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. Noah moved to the window while Rochelle quickly gathered the papers. Silas, Pike, and two rough-looking men rode into view, their horses' hooves kicking up dust. Pike dismounted first, his fine coat catching on his gun belt as he straightened up. "Hand over that book," Pike demanded, stalking toward the door. Rochelle planted her feet firmly, hands steady at her sides. Noah stepped forward, palms raised in a peaceful gesture. "Can't do that, Mr. Pike. This here's evidence for the judge." Pike's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You really want to play it this way?" His hand drifted toward his holster. The tension crackled like lightning about to strike, but before anyone could move, new hoofbeats thundered up the track. Sheriff Lathrop appeared on his lathered gelding, riding hard. "Hold right there," the sheriff called out, swinging down from his mount. Preacher Whitley's boy brought word at dawn. That ledger's evidence, now under my protection. Pike's jaw worked as he glared at each person in turn. Finally, he stepped back, though his eyes promised this wasn't over. "Fine," he spat. "We'll let the judge sort it out." The ride back to town was a strange procession. Noah and Rochelle in the wagon, Pike and his men following behind, and Sheriff Lathrop bringing up the rear. They moved at a measured pace through the lengthening shadows of dusk, each lost in their own thoughts about what the ledger's contents might mean for the days ahead. The sun was setting when they finally approached the edge of town, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The weathered sign for Willow Flats creaked gently in the evening breeze, welcoming them back to whatever tomorrow might bring. The wagon rattled into the yard well after darkness had fallen. Ruth stood in the doorway, lamplight spilling onto the porch behind her. The rich smell of beef stew drifted out to greet them as Noah helped Rochelle down from the seat. Inside, Karen moved quietly from the stove, taking a clean cloth to wipe the road dust from Noah's sleeve. Her touch was gentle, almost shy, and her eyes held gratitude that went deeper than words. Noah ducked his head, uncomfortable with the attention but warmed by the gesture. "Mika's been asking for you," she said softly to Rochelle. "He wanted to hear how the adventure went." Sheriff Lathrop cleared his throat from the doorway. "I'll take that ledger now. Lock it up safe in my office until morning court." He tucked the precious book inside his coat, nodded to them all, and stepped out into the night. The clip-clop of his horse's hooves faded slowly down the street. Ruth ladled out bowls of steaming stew, passing them around the table. They had just settled in to eat when Noah's head snapped up. A faint creak from outside the kitchen window caught his attention, too deliberate to be the wind, too careful to be innocent. Without a word, he rose and slipped out the front door, moving silent as a shadow around the corner of the house. There, bent over the woodpile, a man was rifling through the stacked logs as if searching for something. Noah closed the distance in 3 long strides. The intruder spun at the last second, swinging a wild punch that Noah blocked with his forearm. They grappled in the darkness, boots scuffing in the dirt. Noah's strength and experience told as he wrestled the man down, pinning him without ever reaching for his holstered Colt. A sharp crack split the night. Rochelle stood on the porch, her late husband's single-action revolver pointed skyward, smoke curling from the barrel. The warning shot was all it took. The intruder wrenched free and fled into the darkness, limping heavily. "Left something behind," Noah said, picking up a torn piece of coat that had caught on the woodpile. In the lamplight from the house, they could make out the letters stitched into the fabric. "CP Art Track Crew. Pike's man," Rochelle said grimly, lowering the revolver. They hurried inside, checking each window and sliding the heavy wooden bolts home. Ruth drew the curtains tight while Karen held Micah close, the boy's eyes wide with excitement despite his illness. They had barely settled again when a knock at the door brought them all to their feet. Noah's hand dropped to his gun until a familiar voice called out, "It's Cole," came the doctor's gruff tone. "Here to check on my patient." Dr. Cole's examination of Micah was thorough but gentle. "Fever's coming down nicely," he announced, packing away his stethoscope. "Lungs are still crackling some, but improving. What he needs now is rest. A quiet day tomorrow would do him good." After the doctor left, Noah and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with paper and ink, carefully copying the most damning pages from their earlier transcription of the ledger. They worked in silence, shoulders nearly touching in the lamplight. "One copy for Preacher Whitley's Bible," Ruth murmured, sliding the first set of papers into an envelope. Noah nodded, finishing the second set. "And one for Under the Flower Bin. Can't risk losing everything if Pike tries anything else." The house creaked and settled around them as they doused the lanterns one by one. In the darkness, Noah could hear the others finding their way to bed. Rochelle's firm stride, Karen's soft footsteps as she carried Micah, Ruth's quiet prayers. Sleep came in small pockets that night, interrupted by every snap of a twig outside, every whisper of wind against the windows. Noah dozed fitfully in the loft, alert to any sound that might mean trouble. They rose before the sun, dressing with care in their plainest but tidiest clothes. Rochelle pinned her hair severely back, while Ruth helped Karen smooth Micah's cowlick. Noah brushed his coat and straightened his tie. Aware that appearances mattered in a courtroom, the morning air was crisp and clean as they stepped out together. Preacher Whitley met them at the gate, one copy of the evidence safely tucked in his Bible. Without discussion, they fell into step. Walking toward the courthouse as the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of promise, the courthouse filled. Quickly that morning, wooden benches creaking under the weight of curious townsfolk. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Noah and the Caldwell sisters sat together in the front row, their backs straight, hands folded in their laps. Judge Burdick settled onto the bench, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the sunlight. He adjusted his black robes and nodded to Sheriff Lothrop, who stepped forward with the recovered ledger. "Your Honor," the sheriff said, placing the book carefully on the judge's desk. "Evidence found at Section House Number 3, as reported." Ruth took the stand first, her voice clear and steady as she identified the signatures. "It's Levi's hand there," she said, pointing to a careful scrawl. "He always made his L's just so, with that little curl at the bottom." Rocho followed, describing the abandoned section house in detail, the broken windows, the rusted stove, the hidden ledger. Her testimony painted a picture of desperate men trying to document dangerous conditions before disaster struck. When Karen stepped up, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the hushed room. "The telegram came on a Tuesday," she said, twisting her handkerchief, "said there'd been a wreck. Bad brakes, they told us. By the time we reached Denver," she paused, gathering strength. "By then, all three were gone." Pike's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection. This emotional display has no bearing on property rights." "Overruled," Judge Burdick said firmly. "The witness may continue." A commotion at the door drew all eyes as young Eli Bixby burst in, waving a yellow telegram. "Message from Denver, Your Honor." He handed it to the sheriff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Burdick read aloud, confirming previous wire stop Karen. "Caldwell and son Micah under care dates March 15 through 22 stop. Hospital charges $42.15 paid in full stop records available upon request. Stop signed Dr. William Morrison, Denver General Hospital stop." Dr. Cole rose from his seat, straightening his vest. "Your Honor, if I may." At the judge's nod, he continued. "I've been treating young Micah since their return. The timing of his illness aligns perfectly with the Denver hospital records. These ladies couldn't have manufactured this timeline, even if they'd wanted to." Noah stood next, the ledger open in his large hands. His voice, usually so quiet, filled the courtroom as he read. March 12, reported brake failure on engine 23 again. Parts requested February 1st, still not delivered. Crew refuses to run night freight until fixed. Signed Thomas Caldwell, lead brakeman. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Burdick rapped his gavel once, sharp and decisive. "Mr. Pike," he said, eyes hard behind his spectacles, "these forfeiture papers you've presented show clear signs of fraudulent creation. Sheriff Lathrop stepped forward, iron manacles gleaming. Pike's face twisted as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. This is an outrage. The railroad judge Burdick cut in, will be hearing from this court regarding your activities. He shuffled his papers, then pronounced, his ruling, the Caldwell sisters' occupancy claim is hereby validated. Mr. Kramer's deed, sold in error, will be corrected to reflect joint title with the sisters. The county error fund will compensate Mr. Kramer for the full purchase price. Before the ripple of reaction could settle, a thin man in an expensive suit stood up. Your Honor, I represent the Colorado Pacific Railroad's legal department. We intend to appeal based on right-of-way requirements for the new track. The judge nodded wearily, so noted. I'm ordering a proper survey of water access and grade requirements within the week. He banged his gavel. Court adjourned. As they filed out of the courthouse, townspeople who had hurried past them just days ago now paused to tip their hats. Mrs. Snodgrass pressed a fresh pie into Ruth's hands, whispering congratulations. That evening, they gathered around their kitchen, tabled the victory, somehow both sweet and uncertain. Noah carved the chicken, while Ruth passed bowls of potatoes. Karen helped Micah with his spoon, his small face bright with returning health. Rochel poured coffee for everyone, her movements precise and thoughtful. They ate quietly, each lost in their own thoughts about the railroad's next move. The shared meal was both a celebration and a gathering of strength. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the deepening dusk, its song a reminder that each day brought its own challenges to face. Together, 2 days after the courthouse victory, the morning silence broke with the rattle of surveying equipment. 3 men in dusty work clothes trudged onto the property, carrying wooden tripods and metal chains that glinted in the early light. Noah watched from the porch as they set up their transit, a brass instrument that caught the sun like a cat's. I, the crew chief, a weathered man named Harrison, consulted a sheaf of papers before directing his men to start measuring. The chains clinked across the ground, marking distances with metal stakes. By mid-morning, their intentions became clear. The proposed track would cut through the back acre, right where a natural spring fed the small seep the sisters relied on for washing. Noah walked the property line with Harrison, his boots crushing the dry grass. The well's water level had already dropped in the recent dry spell, making the seep even more vital. What if we shifted the curve? Noah suggested, pointing to a route that would leave their water untouched. It could swing wider there, missing the house entirely. Harrison merely shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Above my pay grade, Mr. Plans come straight from headquarters in Denver. I just mark what's on the paper. Ruth, watching this exchange from the kitchen window, set her jaw. I'm riding to the county seat, she announced, gathering papers into her satchel. We need those water rights filed proper. Karen helped her sister collect signatures from neighboring homesteads. The Snodgrasses, the Petersons, and old widow McPherson all testified that the spring had served the property since winter. Their names filled 2 pages in neat rows. The spring wagon creaked under Ruth Ash. She set out for the 20-mile journey to the agency clerk. Noah handed her a canteen and a packet of cornbread, their fingers brushing briefly. Mind the ruts. Past Miller's Creek, he said softly. They've deepened since the last rain. While Ruth was away, Noah threw himself into fortifying their home. The steady rhythm of his hammer echoed across the yard as he tightened loose shingles and reinforced roof beams. Each nail-driven home felt like a statement, not of defiance, but of dignified permanence. The afternoon sun found Karen and Micah sitting on the front stoop, sharing an apple. The boy's breathing came easier now, his cough loosening its grip. He leaned against his mother, pointing at clouds and finding shapes in their soft masses. Ruth didn't return until late the next afternoon. Her face was tired but triumphant as she climbed down from the wagon. She'd spent the night at Mrs. Snodgrass's place in town, not wanting to risk the rutted roads and darkness. Got them all stamped and filed, she said, holding up the water rights. Affidavits. The clerk said they'll stand up. The seep's been tied to this property longer than the railroad's been surveying. That evening, as shadows stretched long across their yard, Preacher Whitley's buggy rattled up to the gate. He found them all on the porch, even Micah, who was wrapped in a quilt against the cooling air. Folks in town are worried, the preacher said, settling into the chair Noah offered. "Not just about your water. Other properties might face similar issues if the railroad pushes through wherever they please." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "I'm thinking we need a town meeting. Get everyone together, speak our piece, calm and clear. The railroad's got its rights, sure enough, but so do the people who've put down roots here." Noah nodded slowly. "Reckon that's wise. Better to handle it, peaceful and proper." "We'll need to present a united front," Rochelle added, her voice firm. "Not just our household, but the whole community. I can host it at the church, preacher." Whitley offered neutral ground and room enough for everyone. They sat with the idea as dusk gathered around them. A cool breeze stirred the cottonwoods, carrying the sweet scent of late blooms. One by one, they agreed they would face this challenge as they had faced the others. With dignity and determination, Karen tucked a sleepy Micah into bed while the others discussed details. The boy's breathing came soft and regular now, each day bringing more strength back to his small frame. In the kitchen, Ruth copied out a notice for the meeting, while Noah and Rochelle planned what points needed raising. The house settled around them, solid and secure despite the uncertainty ahead. They had made it a fortress, not through barricades and barriers, but through the strength of shared purpose and quiet resolve. The town square hummed with voices as the sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose. Lanterns swayed from posts, casting dancing shadows across the gathered faces. Sparks from Peterson's blacksmith shop drifted on the evening breeze, tiny points of light against the darkening heavens. Nearly everyone in Willow Flats had turned out, creating a sea of worn hats and cotton bonnets. They formed a rough circle around a cleared space where Judge Burdick had set up a small table. Sheriff Lathrop stood nearby, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching the crowd with careful eyes. The railroad's counsel, a sharp-featured man named Edwards, spoke first. He stood straight-backed in his city suit, gesturing with precise movements. "Progress cannot be denied, good people. The railroad brings prosperity, jobs, commerce, connection to the wider world. Our payroll alone supports dozens of families in this county. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Edwards continued, citing figures and projections, painting a picture of unstoppable growth. When he finished, Ruth Caldwell stepped forward. Her plain dress and quiet demeanor commanded attention without demanding it. She held her Bible in one hand and the copied ledger pages in the other. "Proverbs tells us that a just weight is the Lord's delight," she said, voice clear in the evening air. "We don't stand against progress. We stand for truth." She read from the ledger. Dates, complaints, signatures, evidence of corners cut and safety ignored. Rochelle moved up beside her sister, tall and resolute. "We're not asking for charity," she stated firmly. "We're asking for sense. Without that spring water, we can't wash proper, can't keep house. 3 widows and a sick child. We need that seep to survive. The wells dropping daily in this dry spell." The crowd shifted, neighbors nodding. They'd seen the sisters struggle firsthand, watched them build a respectable home. From grief's ashes, Karen rose next, standing straight despite her weariness. "My boy Micah," she began, voice steady but touched with emotion. "He's fought fever and cough for months. Having a stable home, clean water, regular care, that's what's bringing him back to health. Moving us, or cutting off our water, could kill him as sure as any sickness." Micah sat wrapped in a quilt on Preacher Whitley's lap, his small face serious as he watched his mother speak. The sight of him, still pale but improving, touched hearts more than any argument could dot. Noah had been standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. Now he stepped forward, removing his hat. Lamplight caught the silver threading through his dark hair as he faced the crowd. "Folks," he said, his deep voice carrying easily, "I came here looking for 4 walls and a roof, found, instead, a lesson in sharing space with decency." He paused, looking at the sisters, then back at the townspeople. "We've all seen what happens when men reach for guns instead of sense. Children can't sleep peaceful when adults choose pride over justice." He turned to Edwards, speaking direct but respectful. "There's a solution here that builds instead of tears down. Reroute the track 50 yards west, it'll miss the spring entirely. In return, we'll give over our back fence line for a tool yard. The seep stays untouched, our joint title stands respected, and the railroad gets its right-of-way without any blood or bitterness. Sheriff Lathrop stepped forward. The law's clear on this now. That house and its water rights are protected. Judge Burdick nodded firmly from his seat. The crowd stirred, remembering the community's supper weeks ago, how the household had opened their doors in peace. They recalled to the trial's revelations, Pike's fraud exposed, truth winning out over Force. Edwards huddled with his associates, heads bent in serious discussion. The town waited, lantern flames flickering in the growing dark. Finally, he straightened and approached Noah. "The railroad accepts your proposal," he announced. "We'll curve the line west of the spring. You'll be compensated for the survey stakes and any inconvenience. We'll withdraw our appeal of the title ruling." He extended his hand. Noah shook it firmly, then Rochelle, Ruth, and Karen each did the same. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause, relief and hope mingling in the sound. Back home that night, the little family knelt together in the kitchen. Tears flowed freely as Ruth led them in prayer, thanks rising up with the cricket song through the open window. The house stood quiet around them, solid and sure. A shelter made stronger by the day's victory of sense over strife. Days after the town meeting, railroad crews arrived with red survey flags marking the newly agreed curve. The bright markers fluttered in the breeze, tracing a gentle arc that left the precious spring and backyard untouched. Noah watched from the porch as the men worked, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Inside Judge Burdick's office, chairs sat before his desk as he lifted the corrected joint title with ceremonial gravity. His pen scratched across the paper, making official what they'd all come to know in their hearts. Rochelle Caldwell, Ruth Caldwell, Karen Caldwell, and Noah Kramer were now legal owners of the house they'd defended together, the county compensation. For the flawed sale came in crisp banknotes. Noah didn't hesitate in spending a good portion on much-needed repairs. Fresh shingles replaced the weathered ones that had leaked during spring rains. A sturdy new pump handle made drawing water easier on everyone's shoulders. The second-hand cook stove, while not pristine, brought warmth to the kitchen and light to Ruth's eyes as she tested its even heat. Dr. Cole's visit brought the best news of all. He examined Micah thoroughly, listening to the boy's chest and, checking his temperature, keep him warm and rested. He advised Karen, but the danger has passed. Karen's shoulders sagged with relief as she hugged her son close. That evening, lamplight spilled golden through the windows as they gathered for what Ruth dubbed their roof super. No formal speeches marked the occasion, just the simple abundance of fresh bread, savory stew, and laughter that rang true and deep. When Ruth asked Noah to say grace, his voice wavered with emotion, but held steady as he thanked God for bringing them all together. The meal passed in comfortable fellowship, plates being passed and stories shared. After the dishes were cleared and washed, Karen carried a sleepy Micah to bed, tucking him in with extra care. Rochelle made her usual evening rounds, checking window latches and door bolts with practiced attention. Ruth pinned tomorrow's chore list to the pantry door, her neat handwriting laying out the shared tasks that kept their household running smoothly. As Noah moved toward the loft ladder, the sisters gathered near, their eyes twinkling with affectionate teasing. Ruth's grin was bright in the lamplight as she spoke words that wrapped around Noah's heart. "You're not sleeping alone anymore, Noah. You're sleeping with all of us, one roof, one faith, one family." Color rose in Noah's cheeks as he smiled back, unable to hide his joy. He climbed to his loft, the wooden rungs, familiar now, beneath his hands. Settling onto his bed, he listened to the comfortable sounds of the house settling around him in the distance. A train whistle echoed through the night, its track now curved safely away from their spring. Noah closed his eyes, surrounded by the presence of his newfound family, knowing at last what it meant to be truly home. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.